everyone, Talia from Zart Art, and today we're going to be making stained glass animals. So this is an example of what we'll be making. So what we're doing is creating a stained glass effect by only using paper as well as colour tracing paper. So the process for this is to first use our tracing paper. But if you don't have tracing paper, then baking paper will work as well. And I'm going to colour it using some of these inks, but you can use food dyes or watercolours as well, whatever you have around that will colour the tracing paper. And all I'm going to do is apply some different sections of colour onto this paper, and we're going to use that as our stained glass pieces. So I'm just going to apply the Art Spectrum drawing inks. The reason why I'm using these inks is because they'll blend together well, so to create my secondary colours, I can add my two primaries and I'll make a really nice green. So just spreading it with a little bit of water in this brush. So what's great about these inks as well is that you can water them down a bit too, because we want that transparency from the tracing paper, so adding a bit of water into a few blobs of ink will make it spread quite a bit. And you might notice if you are using baking paper especially, or even this tracing paper, if you apply too much water, it will start to buckle, but that's completely fine because we'll be cutting this into smaller pieces. So don't worry too much if you add a bit too much water, because we're just going to be using small pieces, so it doesn't matter if that buckling does occur. So just applying a little bit more colour. I want to create a green in between these two, so I'll add a little bit of that yellow as well, and then blend those together. So once you've got a bit of colour down on your tracing or baking paper, you can leave that aside to dry. Now just put these away because you won't be needing any more of your inks or dyes. And then the next step is to create this black outline. So that stained glass effect with the really thick black lines, we're going to create that out of paper and using our scalpel tool. So all I'm going to do for this is draw out my design. So what's really important when you are making your design is to make sure that you've got really thick lines, because if your lines are very thin, it's going to be very easy to rip those and then make mistakes. So depending on what skill level you are, you might want to do something that's quite complicated with very small shapes, or if you're just getting started using a cutting knife, then you might want to do larger shapes which are easier to cut out. So I'll just use this one as an example, and just going to draw the shape of your animal and then do those bigger shapes inside. As I'm drawing, I'm just going to make sure my black areas have a thick outline around them, just so I know where I'm going to cut. So I want to make sure that we've got a lot of room in between our shapes so that we don't cut off any areas that are meant to stay. Now that I've got my drawing done, all I'm going to do is use my scalpel knife. Make sure you've got a cutting mat underneath so you don't cut into the table. And I'm just going to go around these shapes and cut out those. And then I'm going to use scissors to cut around my larger bird shape. So as always, make sure that your other hand isn't too close to the scalpel. It's always good to cut away from your hand and just cut in small sections. If your paper is quite thick, like this cartridge is, then you might need to make a few cuts before it will be completely cut through. So now just with scissors, all I'm going to do is cut around that bird shape. Just make sure you take note of where your large lines are, just so we don't cut into those center sections. So we want to make sure we have at least 1 centimeter in between our cutout sections in the middle and then the outline of the bird. Now I've got my outline for our little stained glass bird. So I'm just going to use the side that doesn't have the pencil marks on it, but we can leave that over there for the minute. And here, I've got my piece of tracing paper that I made previously just so it had some time to dry. What you'll notice with the tracing paper is it doesn't dry as quickly as normal cartridge because it's plastic, it won't absorb as quickly. So all I'm going to do with these colors is cut out geometric shapes, so triangles, squares, just randomly. I'm not trying to cut out perfect shapes, just cutting out the pieces that we'll use to glue onto our little frame, and that will create the stained glass look. So in terms of drying time, it depends how much water you apply to the piece of tracing or baking paper. This one has been sitting for about half an hour for it to be completely dry, and I did dab out some of the spots that hadn't dried yet, because you will find as the paper warps there will be pools of liquid that start to come up in certain sections, so it can be very handy just to use a tissue to dry those up quickly. I've cut out a few different colors. I can start working on this frame. If you need any more, just keep your spare pieces to the side in case you want to cut out more of a certain color. So just using the back of your frame, so the area where you've got your pencil, all I'm going to do is use a little bit of super tack. Now I'm using super tack because it will dry quickly. You can of course use just a normal glue stick, but you might have to wait in between working on layers a little bit for things to dry, and just being aware of how sticky it is on your fingers. So just using my super tack and a little bit of glue on a stick. All I'm going to do is start by applying some of the glue onto the frame and then sticking down my colored piece of tracing paper. So it's very important when you're doing this to overlap your shapes and your colors, because that will create a really nice combinations of patterns and different colors intersecting. So you want to make sure there are no gaps in between. So if you find little gaps there, then you can stick another piece over the top. And don't worry too much if your pieces go over your black frame, because you can just cut those with scissors to tidy them up at the end. If you notice there are any sections that are starting to peel back, or any slight areas that aren't completely covered, just grab another piece or another shape and glue that over the top. So we've got our pieces stuck down, and the super tack will dry clear, so don't worry about any little bits of glue that are stuck to it. But I've got a few shapes that are starting to move off of the frame, so all I'm going to do is use my scissors just to trim those back. There we have our little stained glass style bird. So the glue will dry and then become clear. So if you're using a glue stick, then it will be clear straight away, but otherwise the super tack will be fine as is. So this is a fun activity to try different cutting skills, and you can get really intricate with the kinds of shapes or different kinds of animals that you might want to try. For display, these will look really nice against a window with the light shining through. But we hope you enjoyed the video, and we look forward to seeing you next time.